doors of the great hall slammed open, before Elena Voss could even lift her eyes to the crowd, and the sound cracked through the silence like a warning bell. Every head turned, every breath caught. The naming ceremony had not even begun, and already the air felt wrong, heavy, charged with something no one in that hall could name. Elena stood at the center of the stone platform, dressed in a pale gray gown, stitched with silver thread, her hands folded in front of her, the way she had been taught since childhood. She was the daughter of Victor Voss, Beta of the Ashwood Pack, and today, she was supposed to become Luna of the Thornridge Pack. It was not a match she had chosen. It was a match her father had signed with his own hand, a peace offering between two packs, who had spent nearly 30 years circling each other with suspicion and old grudges. She had met her intended husband only twice. Cade Thornridge was tall, polite in the way men are polite when they want something from you, and utterly uninterested in her as a person. She had accepted this the way she accepted most things in her life, quietly, without complaint, because complaining had never once changed anything for her. Now she stood in front of hundreds of pack members from both territories, waiting for a man who was supposed to walk through those doors and place his mark on her, sealing an alliance that would end decades of tension. The elders had already lit the ceremonial fire. The scent of burning cedar filled the hall. Somewhere behind her, her father stood rigid, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the entrance where Cade should have appeared by now. He did not appear. Minutes passed. The murmurs began quietly, then grew louder, spreading through the crowd like a spark catching dry grass. Elena kept her chin high, though her stomach twisted with a dread she refused to show on her face. She had spent her whole life learning how to hide what she felt. This was simply one more moment that required the same skill. Then a messenger burst through the side entrance, breathless, his boots scattering dust across the polished floor. He ran straight to the Thornridge elders and whispered something urgent. The color drained from their faces almost instantly. Word spread through the hall in seconds, passed from mouth to mouth like poison. Cade Thornridge was gone. He had left his own territory before dawn, with a rogue wolf named Nora Blake, a woman he had apparently loved in secret for over a year. He had no intention of returning for the ceremony. He had no intention of honoring the alliance his father had built with blood, land, and years of careful negotiation. Elena felt the words land on her like stones, one after another, each one heavier than the last. She did not cry. She would not give this room the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. But humiliation burned through her chest anyway, hot and suffocating, as hundreds of eyes turned to stare at the girl left standing alone at the altar. Her father's face went pale with fury. The Thornridge Alpha, Garrick Thornridge, stood frozen near the front row, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, clearly as blindsided as everyone else. Whatever peace this ceremony was meant to create was crumbling in real time, right there in front of both packs. Someone in the crowd laughed, a short, cruel sound quickly stifled. Someone else whispered a word Elena refused to let herself hear clearly. She kept her eyes forward, on the flickering ceremonial fire, and told herself that this moment, however unbearable, would end. All moments ended eventually. She had learned that lesson many times before. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened again, and this time the sound was different. It was not the sound of a nervous messenger or a frightened attendant. It was the sound of certainty. Heavy boots against stone, unhurried, deliberate, each step landing with a kind of quiet authority that made the entire room go still before anyone even turned around. Elena turned last, because she had learned that showing curiosity too quickly made a person look weak. When she finally did look, her breath caught in her throat. Alpha King Damon Cross stood in the doorway, alone. She knew him by reputation before she had ever seen his face in person. Everyone in this part of the region knew him. His pack, the Crossline territory, held more land, more strength, and more influence than Ashwood and Thornridge combined. He did not attend ceremonies for smaller packs. He did not involve himself in disputes that were not his own, and he certainly did not walk into another pack's most sacred ritual without an invitation, without guards, without warning. Yet here he was. He wore a dark coat that fit him like it had been made specifically to move with him rather than restrict him, and his expression carried none of the confusion that colored every other face in the hall. He looked, Elena thought, like a man who already knew exactly what he had come to do. Whispers erupted again, sharper this time, laced with fear rather than pity. The Ashwood elders exchanged uneasy glances. The Thornridge Alpha took a step forward, his hand raised, as though to demand an explanation, but something in Damon's expression made him stop before he spoke a single word. Damon walked the length of the hall without acknowledging anyone else in the room. His eyes were fixed only on Elena, and the intensity of that gaze made her want to look away, though some stubborn part of her refused to give him that satisfaction either. She had already been humiliated once today. She would not let a stranger see fear on top of it. He stopped a few feet from the platform, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, close enough that the fire's light caught the sharp angles of his face. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable, until Elena's father finally found his voice. "Alpha Cross," Victor Voss said carefully, stepping forward with the caution of a man who understood exactly how much power stood in front of him. "This ceremony does not concern your territory. I must ask why you are here." Damon did not look away from Elena when he answered. "It concerns me now." The words landed like a struck match in a room full of dry kindling. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Garrick Thornridge's face twisted with something between outrage and disbelief. Elena's own heart pounded so hard she was certain everyone near her could hear it. "My son's absence is a private matter," Garrick said sharply, finding his voice at last. "It has nothing to do with you, Alpha Cross. I would ask you to leave before this becomes something neither of our packs wants." Damon finally turned his head, and the look he gave the Thornridge Alpha was calm, almost bored. The look of a man who had faced far greater threats than an offended father. "Your son abandoned an alliance, and a woman in front of 2 full packs," he said. "That is no longer a private matter. That is a broken promise made in public, and broken promises have consequences." Elena's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening, trying to find the logic behind a man she had never met, walking into the worst moment of her life, and speaking as though he had some claim to it. She searched his face for any hint of mockery, any sign that this was some elaborate insult aimed at her family, or at the Thornridge pack. She found none. What she found instead unsettled her even more. He looked entirely serious. "What is it you want, Alpha Cross?" her father asked, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. Damon's gaze returned to Elena, steady and unblinking. "I am here to complete the naming ceremony." The hall went utterly silent, the kind of silence that feels louder than any noise. Elena stared at him, certain she had misheard, certain the shock of the day had finally scrambled her thoughts beyond repair. "You cannot be serious," Garrick said, his voice rising. "You have no claim here. This woman was promised to my son, not to you." "Your son forfeited that promise the moment he left this territory before dawn," Damon replied, his tone even, almost gentle, though there was steel beneath every word. "I am not taking anything that belongs to you. I am simply refusing to let this woman stand alone in front of 2 packs because your family failed to honor its word." Elena's chest tightened. Part of her wanted to protest, to remind everyone in the room that she was a person with her own voice, not an object to be claimed by whichever powerful man walked through the door first. But another part of her, quieter and more honest, noticed something strange stirring beneath her humiliation. For the first time all day, someone in this hall was speaking as though her dignity mattered. Her father stepped closer to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. "Elena, say something, or this decision will be made for you." She swallowed hard, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the storm of emotion inside her. She turned to face Damon fully, meeting his gaze without flinching this time. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not know me. Whatever debt you believe you owe, this is not the way to repay it." Something flickered across Damon's expression, quick and unreadable, gone before she could name it. "You are right that you do not know me," he said. "But I know more about you than you might think, and I did not come here to embarrass you further. I came because I could not stand by and watch you be discarded like something unwanted." The words settled over her strangely, warm in a way she was not prepared for. She hated how much they affected her, hated that a stranger's declaration in front of a crowded hall could loosen the tight knot of shame in her chest even slightly. She reminded herself sharply that kindness from powerful men often came with hidden costs. She had learned that lesson from her own father's negotiations more than once. The Thornridge elders began arguing among themselves in low, urgent voices. The Ashwood elders watched with a mixture of alarm and calculation, clearly already considering what this sudden shift might mean for their pack's future. Agnes Hale, the eldest of the Ashwood elders, stepped forward, her cane tapping against the stone floor. "This is highly unusual," she said, addressing the room rather than any single person. "A naming ceremony cannot proceed without the consent of both parties, and it certainly cannot proceed with a substitution announced in the middle of the ritual." "Then ask her," Damon said simply, nodding toward Elena. "The choice belongs to her, not to either of our fathers, and not to a man who fled before sunrise." Every eye in the hall turned to Elena once more, but this time, the weight of their attention felt different. It was not pity. It was not judgment. It was a question, waiting to be answered, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the answer was actually hers to give. She looked at her father, whose expression was unreadable, caught between fear of insulting a powerful alpha and fear of what this decision might cost the fragile peace he had spent years trying to build. She looked at Garrick Thornridge, whose fury had shifted into something closer to desperation, aware that his pack's reputation was crumbling in front of witnesses from 3 territories. And she looked at Damon Cross, standing perfectly still, waiting, offering no pressure, no demand, only the space for her to choose. Elena thought of every moment in her life when a decision had been made for her. The marriage contract she never asked to sign, the gown she never asked to wear, the ceremony she never asked to attend. And she thought about the strange, unexpected fact that the one man in this hall, not trying to control her outcome, was the same man everyone feared the most. She lifted her chin, and for the first time that day, her voice did not waver. "I will hear what you have to say, Alpha Cross," she said, "but I make no promises beyond that." A murmur rippled through the crowd, equal parts shock and disbelief. Garrick opened his mouth to object, but before a single word left him, Damon stepped closer to the platform, close enough now that Elena could feel the quiet intensity radiating from him like heat from a flame. "That is all I am asking for," he said. "A chance to be heard." The ceremonial fire crackled between them, its light dancing across both their faces, and somewhere deep in the hall, Elena understood, with a strange, unsettling certainty, that whatever happened next would change the direction of her entire life. The peace her father had spent years building now hung by a single thread, and the man holding that thread was a stranger who had walked into the worst day of her life and refused to let her stand alone. Outside the hall, the wind picked up, rattling the tall windows, as though the world itself sensed that something had shifted. Elena did not know yet whether she had just been saved or simply handed to a different kind of danger, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing about this day was going to end the way anyone in that room had expected. The hall erupted into chaos the moment Elena's words settled over the crowd. Voices rose from every corner, elders shouting over one another, pack members whispering in tight, anxious clusters, and somewhere near the back, a young Thornridge wolf began arguing loudly with an Ashwood guard about whose fault this entire disaster truly was. Elena stood at the center of it all, feeling strangely calm, despite the storm swirling around her, her eyes still fixed on Damon Cross. Garrick Thornridge pushed forward, his face flushed with anger and something closer to panic. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You cannot simply walk into another pack's ceremony and claim the role your alpha never agreed to." "I am not claiming anything that was not already abandoned," Damon replied, his tone level despite the tension crackling around him. "Your son made his choice before dawn. I am simply offering Elena a choice of her own, something it seems no one else in this hall thought to give her." The words struck harder than perhaps even Damon intended, and Elena felt her father flinch beside her. Victor Voss had always believed he was protecting his daughter by arranging a stable future for her, but hearing it named so plainly, in front of everyone, made the truth impossible to soften. She had never truly been asked what she wanted, not once. Agnes Hale raised her cane and struck it once against the stone floor, the sharp crack silencing the nearest voices. "Enough," she said. "This ceremony cannot continue in chaos. If a decision is to be made, it will be made with order, not shouting." The hall slowly quieted, though the tension remained thick enough to touch. Agnes turned to Elena, her sharp eyes studying the young woman carefully. You said you would hear him. Do you still hold to that? Elena glanced at her father, whose expression had shifted from fury to something more complicated, a mixture of worry and reluctant curiosity. She glanced at Garrick, whose jaw remained tight with barely restrained anger, and finally she looked at Damon, who waited without a hint of impatience, as though he had all the time in the world despite standing in the middle of a room that clearly wanted him gone. I do, she said. Agnes nodded once. Then this ceremony will pause. Alpha Cross. You will speak with her privately, under the watch of both pack elders, and afterward, she will decide how she wishes to proceed. Is this acceptable to everyone present? Garrick looked as though he wanted to argue, but the murmurs around him made it clear that the crowd, exhausted and stunned by the day's events, wanted resolution more than further conflict. He gave a stiff, reluctant nod. Victor Voss did the same, though his eyes lingered on his daughter with unspoken worry. Elena was led to a smaller chamber just off the main hall, its stone walls lined with old tapestries depicting battles long since resolved into uneasy peace. A single table sat in the center, along with 2 chairs. Agnes and 2 other elders positioned themselves near the door, close enough to observe but far enough to allow something resembling privacy. Damon entered a moment later, closing the heavy door softly behind him. For the first time since he had stormed into the hall, Elena saw something in his posture that resembled uncertainty, though it vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. You did not have to agree to hear me, he said, taking the seat across from her. I did not have many other options that felt like mine, Elena replied honestly. At least this one is. Something like respect flickered across his face. He studied her for a long moment before speaking again. You deserve to know the truth, not just a claim shouted across a crowded hall. Then tell me, she said, folding her hands in her lap the way she always did when trying to steady herself. Why would the Alpha King of Crossline territory walk into a rival ceremony and offer himself as a replacement groom? You do not know me. Whatever reason you have, it did not begin today. Damon exhaled slowly, and for a moment his usual composure softened into something more human. 3 years ago, my younger sister Mira was caught in a border skirmish near Ashwood Land. She was young, careless, and far from home, and she was badly injured when a group of hostile rogues cornered her near the river. Elena's brow furrowed slightly as old memories stirred, distant and half-formed. A young woman from Ashwood pulled her out of that fight, Damon continued. She was outnumbered and risked her own safety to get Mira to safety, before the rogues could finish what they started. She never gave her name. She simply helped and disappeared before anyone could properly thank her. Elena's breath caught as the memory sharpened into focus. She had been 16 at the time, out near the river collecting herbs for her mother, when she stumbled upon a young girl bleeding badly, surrounded by 3 rogue wolves. She remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the desperate choice to intervene, despite knowing she was outmatched. She remembered pulling the girl free and running until her lungs burned, leaving her at the edge of Crossline territory before slipping away into the trees, terrified of what her father would say if he learned she had crossed into rival land. That was you, Damon said quietly, watching the recognition dawn across her face. Wasn't it? Elena said nothing for a long moment, too stunned to speak. She had never told anyone what happened that day, certain it would only bring trouble from both sides. She had assumed the memory would remain hers alone, forgotten by everyone else. A small secret buried beneath years of other, louder obligations. I never knew who she was, Elena finally said. I was afraid to ask questions or draw attention. I simply wanted to help her and leave before anyone noticed. Mira described you for months afterward, Damon said. A girl with dark hair and steady hands, who fought off 3 grown wolves without hesitation and never asked for anything in return. I spent years trying to find her. Not to repay some formal debt, but because I could not stop thinking about the kind of person who would do that for a stranger and then simply vanish. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, unused to being spoken of with such open admiration. I did not save her for a reward, Alpha Cross. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know, he said. That is exactly why I could not stand in that hall today and watch you be treated as though your worth depended on whether Cade Thornridge decided to show up. Silence settled between them, heavy but no longer uncomfortable. Elena studied his face, searching for the hidden agenda she had assumed must exist, the political calculation lurking beneath his words. She found nothing but quiet sincerity, and that unsettled her more than any scheme could have. "You understand what you are proposing," she said carefully. "If I accept, I become Luna of Crossline territory. That is not a small decision, and it is not one I can make simply out of gratitude for something that happened 3 years ago." "I am not asking you to accept out of gratitude," Damon said. "I am asking you to consider it, because you deserve better than what happened to you today, and because I believe, in time, you might find something real here, something neither of us expected." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against every instinct that told her powerful men rarely offered anything without expecting something valuable in return. Yet something about the steadiness in his voice, the absence of the calculating tone she had grown so used to hearing from her father's political allies, made her hesitate before dismissing him entirely. "I need time," she said finally. "Not to decide whether I trust your intentions, but to decide whether I trust my own judgment enough to make this choice." Damon nodded, accepting her answer without argument. "Take whatever time you need. I will not force this. I did not come here today to trade one kind of captivity for another." They sat in silence for a moment longer, before Agnes knocked gently on the door, signaling that the elders outside were growing restless. Elena rose from her chair, her mind spinning with everything she had just learned. She had walked into that hall that morning, expecting to be handed to a stranger who barely acknowledged her existence. She was walking out of this room having been offered, for the first time in her life, an actual choice. As they returned to the main hall together, the crowd fell silent once more, watching for any sign of what had been decided. Elena felt the weight of hundreds of eyes settle over her again, but this time, strangely, it did not feel as unbearable as before. She glanced once at Damon, who walked beside her with quiet patience, offering no pressure, no demand, simply presence. Whatever she chose next, she understood that her life had already changed the moment those doors slammed open. The only question now was which direction she would choose to walk. The hall was still packed when Elena and Damon returned, though the earlier chaos had settled into a tense, watchful quiet. Every pair of eyes tracked their movement across the stone floor, searching for some clue in their expressions, some hint of what had been decided behind closed doors. Elena kept her face composed, though her heart hammered against her ribs with a force that felt almost unbearable. Garrick Thornridge stepped forward before the elders could speak, his voice sharp with impatience. "Well? Has a decision been reached, or are we to stand here all evening while my pack's reputation continues to bleed out in front of witnesses?" Agnes Hale shot him a warning look before turning to Elena. "The choice remains yours, child. No one in this hall will force your hand, not today." Elena felt the full weight of the moment settle over her shoulders. She thought of the conversation in the small chamber, of Damon's steady voice describing a memory she had long buried, of the strange warmth that had crept into her chest despite every instinct warning her to remain guarded. She thought of her father's arranged contract, of Cade's careless abandonment, of a lifetime spent following decisions made for her by people who never once asked what she actually wanted. "I need more time before I answer," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "This is not a decision I will make under pressure from either pack." A ripple of disappointment and relief moved through the crowd in equal measure. Garrick's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further, clearly unwilling to challenge her directly in front of so many witnesses. Damon, standing a few feet away, simply nodded, as though he had expected nothing less. "Then this ceremony is postponed," Agnes announced, striking her cane against the floor once more. "Elena Voss will return to Ashwood territory to consider her choice. Alpha Cross, you and your escort are welcome to remain as guests until she reaches a decision, provided you conduct yourselves with appropriate restraint." Damon inclined his head in agreement, and slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves as they filed out of the hall. Elena felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, now that the immediate spectacle had ended, though she knew the true difficulty was only beginning. That evening, she sat alone in her chamber, back at the Ashwood estate, staring out the window at the darkening sky. The events of the day replayed in her mind over and over, each moment sharper than the last. She thought of Cade's absence, the humiliation of standing alone at the altar, and then the strange, unexpected arrival of a man she barely knew, who had refused to let her stand there in shame. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her father entered without waiting for a response, his expression heavy with the exhaustion of a long and difficult day. "You handled yourself well today," he said, settling into the chair near her window. "Better than I did, I think." Elena offered a small, tired smile. "I did not have much choice but to remain calm. Falling apart in front of 2 entire packs would not have helped anyone." Victor Voss studied his daughter for a long moment, his expression softening into something rarely seen on the face of a man who had spent decades navigating pack politics with careful precision. "I owe you an apology, Elena. I arranged your marriage to Cade because I believed it would secure peace for our people. I never once considered how it might feel for you, being handed off like a piece in someone else's negotiation." Elena's throat tightened unexpectedly. She had waited years to hear something like this from her father, though she had never truly expected it. "I understand why you did it," she said quietly. "I do not blame you for wanting peace. I only wish I had been given a voice in how that peace was achieved." "You have a voice now," her father said. "Whatever you decide about Alpha Cross's offer, it will be your decision, not mine. I will not sign another contract behind your back." The sincerity in his voice eased something tight and painful in her chest, though the larger question of Damon Cross's proposal remained unresolved, circling through her thoughts like a persistent storm. After her father left, she remained by the window for a long while, watching the moonlight settle over the quiet grounds of the estate. The next morning, she found herself walking the garden paths near the edge of the property, hoping the fresh air might help clear her mind. She had not expected to encounter anyone else so early, and she certainly had not expected to find Damon standing near the old stone fountain, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the carved figures worn smooth by decades of rain. "You are an early riser," she said, approaching cautiously. He turned, and for a brief moment, something like relief flickered across his expression, before settling back into his usual composed calm. "I find it difficult to sleep in unfamiliar territory," he admitted. "Old habits, I suppose. Caution has kept me alive more than once." Elena studied him, noting the slight shift in his demeanor now that they were away from the crowded hall, away from the pressure of watching eyes and political posturing. He seemed, in this quiet moment, less like the powerful Alpha King who had stormed a ceremony uninvited, and more like a man simply trying to understand a complicated situation as honestly as he could. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "If I refuse your offer," she said carefully, "what happens then? Does this become another conflict between our territories? Another excuse for old grievances to resurface?" Damon considered the question seriously before answering. "No," he said. "If you refuse, I will accept your decision and return to my territory without resentment. I did not come here to force an alliance through pressure. That is precisely the kind of arrangement I watched almost happen to you yesterday, and I have no interest in becoming another version of it." Elena studied his face carefully, searching for any trace of dishonesty, any flicker that might reveal a hidden motive beneath his calm reassurance. She found none, and that unsettling honesty made her next words come more easily than she expected. "I want to understand you before I decide anything," she said. "Not the version of you that walked into that hall yesterday like a storm, but who you actually are, away from politics and titles." A faint, genuine smile touched the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. "That seems fair," he said. "Ask me anything you wish." They walked the garden paths together as the morning sun rose higher, and slowly, carefully, Elena began asking the questions she had been too overwhelmed to consider the day before. She learned that Damon had become alpha of Crossline territory at a young age, after his father's sudden death left the pack vulnerable to outside threats. She learned that his sister, Mira, was now 19, and studying pack law under the region's most respected elders, determined to prevent the kind of border conflicts that had nearly cost her life years earlier. She learned that Damon rarely trusted easily, having spent years navigating alliances built more on fear than genuine respect. In turn, she found herself sharing pieces of her own life she rarely spoke of, the quiet loneliness of growing up as a beta's daughter expected to embody perfect obedience, the years spent watching her choices shrink smaller and smaller as her father's political ambitions grew. Damon listened without interrupting, without offering empty reassurances, simply present in a way that felt unfamiliar and, strangely, comforting. By the time the sun reached its highest point, Elena realized the tight knot of anxiety she had carried since the previous morning had loosened considerably. She still did not know what her final decision would be, but for the first time since the ceremony's disastrous collapse, she felt something closer to clarity rather than chaos. As they returned toward the estate, a messenger intercepted them, breathless and clearly alarmed. "Alpha Cross," he said urgently. "There has been trouble near the Thornridge border. Reports suggest an attack on one of your outposts." Damon's expression shifted instantly, the calm warmth of the morning, replaced by sharp, focused alertness. "How severe?" "Serious enough that your second-in-command has requested your immediate return," the messenger said. Elena watched the transformation with quiet fascination, understanding in that moment exactly why an entire territory trusted this man to lead them. Whatever softness he had shown her in the garden vanished instantly, replaced by the decisive authority of a leader responding to a genuine crisis. "I must return to Crossline territory immediately," he said, turning to Elena with obvious reluctance. "I am sorry to cut our conversation short." "Go," she said. "Your people need you more than this conversation does." He studied her for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between them before he nodded and turned to follow the messenger. Elena watched him go, an unexpected pang of worry settling in her chest, as she wondered what kind of trouble awaited him at the border, and whether the timing of this attack was truly a coincidence. Elena did not sleep well that night. She kept thinking about the messenger's panicked words, about the sudden shift in Damon's expression when he heard the news, about the timing of an attack occurring at the exact moment two powerful packs were distracted by a collapsed ceremony. Something about the pattern troubled her deeply, though she could not yet name why. The following morning, word reached Ashwood territory that the attack on the Crossline outpost had been contained, with only minor injuries reported among the guards stationed there. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her, though the unease from the night before lingered stubbornly at the edges of her thoughts. 2 days passed without word from Damon. Elena occupied herself with the usual routines of estate life, though her mind kept drifting back to their conversation in the garden, to the unexpected ease of speaking with him, to the strange comfort she had found in his steady presence. She told herself repeatedly that these feelings meant nothing significant, that curiosity about a near stranger was simply a natural response to an extraordinary situation. She was not entirely convinced by her own reasoning. On the third day, a rider arrived at the Ashwood estate, carrying a sealed letter addressed to her personally. She recognized the Crossline crest pressed into the wax before she even broke the seal. The letter was brief, written in a steady, confident hand. "Elena, the situation at the border has been resolved for now, though I remain concerned about what caused it. I do not wish to burden you with matters that are not yet yours to carry, but I did not want you to think my sudden departure meant anything other than what it was, an urgent necessity that could not wait. I meant what I said in the garden. Whatever you decide, I will respect your choice, but I find myself hoping, more than I expected to, that you might choose to see where this could lead. Damon." Elena read the letter twice, then a third time, before setting it carefully on her desk. Something about its honesty, its lack of political posturing, settled deeper into her than she expected. She thought of her father's careful, calculated negotiations, of Cade's careless abandonment, and she found herself comparing both against the steady sincerity radiating from every line of Damon's letter. That afternoon, she sought out her father in his study, finding him bent over a stack of documents related to the pack's ongoing trade agreements. He looked up as she entered, setting his papers aside immediately. "Have you reached a decision?" he asked. "Not entirely," Elena admitted, taking a seat across from him. "But I want to understand something first. The attack on the Crossline outpost. Do you know anything about who might have been responsible?" Her father's expression grew serious. "The timing was suspicious, I will admit. Alpha Cross's advisors suspect it may have been an attempt to distract him during a vulnerable moment, though nothing has been confirmed." "Distract him from what?" Elena asked, though a heavy suspicion was already forming in her mind. "From the ceremony, perhaps," her father said slowly. "Or from whatever decision you might make regarding his offer. It would not be the first time someone attempted to disrupt an alliance before it could properly form." Elena's stomach tightened uncomfortably. "You think someone wanted to prevent him from staying here long enough to convince me?" "I think," her father said carefully, That Cade's disappearance, and this attack occurring so close together, raises questions that deserve answers. I do not yet know who benefits from chaos between our three territories, but someone clearly does. The conversation left Elena more unsettled than before, her mind spinning through possibilities she had not previously considered. She had assumed Cade's abandonment was simply the reckless choice of a young man following his heart, rather than his obligations. Now she wondered if something far more calculated might be unfolding beneath the surface of recent events. That evening, she wrote a response to Damon's letter, choosing her words carefully. Damon, I am relieved to hear the situation at your border has calmed, though I share your concern about its timing. My father believes it may not have been a coincidence, and after our conversation about my questions, I find myself agreeing with him. I have not yet reached a final decision, but I would like to speak with you again when circumstances allow. There are things I believe we should discuss, beyond the matter of the ceremony itself. Elena. She sent the letter the following morning, and within 2 days, received word that Damon would return to Ashwood territory to continue their conversation, along with a small trusted escort rather than a full guard, a gesture Elena recognized as an attempt to keep tensions between the packs from escalating further. When he arrived, Elena met him near the same garden path where they had spoken before, though the mood between them now carried a heavier undertone than their earlier, more relaxed conversation. You mentioned in your letter that you believe the attack was connected to recent events, Damon said as they walked. I have reached the same conclusion, though I have not yet determined who might be responsible. My father suspects someone may be trying to prevent an alliance from forming between us, Elena said. Whether that means Crossline and Ashwood, or something involving Thornridge as well, I am not certain. Damon's expression darkened thoughtfully. Cade's disappearance always struck me as convenient, given the timing. A young man abandoning his responsibilities the very morning of a ceremony meant to secure decades of peace, choosing that exact moment to vanish, with a woman few in his own pack had ever heard of. You think someone convinced him to leave, Elena said slowly, the pieces beginning to align in her mind. I think it is worth investigating, Damon said. If someone orchestrated Cade's disappearance, specifically to disrupt the ceremony, and then attacked my territory when it appeared an alternative alliance might form, that suggests a deliberate pattern, rather than unfortunate coincidence. Elena felt a chill settle over her, despite the warm afternoon sun. Who would benefit from destabilizing all three territories? That, Damon said grimly, is precisely what I intend to find out. They spent the remainder of the afternoon discussing possibilities, carefully working through recent events with the kind of methodical attention Elena had not expected from a man she initially assumed operated purely on instinct and authority. She found herself impressed by his careful reasoning, by his willingness to consider every angle, rather than rushing toward convenient conclusions. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Damon turned to her with an expression more serious than she had yet seen from him. Elena, regardless of what you ultimately decide about my offer, I believe we should work together to uncover what is truly happening here. Too much is at stake for either of us to ignore these warning signs. Elena considered his words carefully, weighing the wisdom of involving herself further in a mystery that seemed to grow more dangerous with each new discovery. Yet something in her refused to simply retreat to the safety of ignorance, especially now that she understood how deeply these events might be connected to her own life. Agreed, she said finally. Whatever is happening, I want to understand it fully before I make any decision about my future. Damon nodded, something like respect flickering across his expression once more. Then let us begin by learning exactly where Cade Thornridge went, and who might have helped him disappear so conveniently. As they parted ways that evening, Elena felt the shape of her future shifting once again, no longer defined solely by questions of marriage and alliance, but by a growing determination to uncover the truth behind a conspiracy that threatened far more than her own personal happiness. The search for answers began quietly, careful not to draw attention from either the Thornridge or Ashwood elders, who Elena and Damon agreed might react unpredictably if they learned an investigation into Cade's disappearance was already underway. Damon assigned the task to a trusted member of his inner circle, a sharp and quietly efficient tracker named Finn Ashby, while Elena reached out discreetly to an old childhood friend, Ivy Marsh, who worked within the Thornridge household as an attendant, and often heard conversations others assumed went unnoticed. Ivy met Elena in a secluded corner of the Ashwood Market 3 days later, her expression tense as she glanced repeatedly over her shoulder before speaking. "I do not know how deep this goes," she said quietly, "but something is not right within Thornridge territory." Cade left in the middle of the night with barely any preparation, yet somehow he had funds, supplies, and an escort waiting for him near the Northern Trail. "An escort?" Elena asked, her pulse quickening. "Cade did not travel alone?" Ivy shook her head. 2 guards accompanied him, both loyal to a man named Silas Vane, one of Garrick's senior advisors. I overheard one of the kitchen staff mention it in passing, though she seemed nervous discussing it further. Elena filed the name away carefully, recognizing it from her father's occasional discussions about Thornridge politics. Silas Vane had long been considered ambitious, a man who believed Garrick's leadership had grown too cautious in recent years, too willing to seek peace with neighboring packs rather than expand Thornridge influence through strength. "Do you think Silas convinced Cade to leave?" Elena asked. "I think it is possible," Ivy said. "Silas has never approved of the alliance with Ashwood. He believes it weakens Thornridge standing among the other territories. If Cade's marriage to you had gone forward, it would have secured decades of peace, but it also would have limited Thornridge's ability to pursue more aggressive expansion in the future." Elena thanked her friend for the information, promising to keep her involvement discreet, and returned to the estate with her mind racing through new possibilities. If Silas Vane had orchestrated Cade's disappearance specifically to prevent the alliance, it would explain the convenient timing, though it still left unanswered questions about the attack on Damon's outpost. She relayed the information to Damon that evening through a careful letter, and within 2 days, his tracker Finn confirmed a troubling discovery of his own. The rogue wolves responsible for the border attack had been traced back to a small group operating just outside official Thornridge territory, a group known to accept payment for mercenary work, rather than acting out of any personal loyalty or grievance. "If Silas paid rogues to attack my outpost," Damon said when he returned to Ashwood territory to discuss the findings in person, "his goal likely was not destruction, but distraction. He needed my attention pulled away from Ashwood territory long enough that any budding alliance between us would lose momentum before it could solidify." Elena considered this carefully as they walked together through the quiet garden paths that had become their usual meeting place. But why would he go to such lengths? Even if Cade's marriage to me failed, surely Thornridge would simply seek another alliance eventually. "Unless," Damon said slowly, working through the logic aloud, "Silas does not want any alliance at all. Unless his true goal is to weaken Thornridge's diplomatic ties entirely, positioning himself to seize greater influence within the pack by portraying Garrick's leadership as ineffective and outdated." Elena's breath caught as the pieces clicked into place. "You believe he wants Garrick removed from power?" "I believe it is a strong possibility," Damon said. "If Thornridge continues suffering public embarrassments and diplomatic failures, pressure will mount within the pack to replace Garrick with someone perceived as stronger, more decisive. Silas has positioned himself as exactly that kind of alternative for years." The implications settled heavily over Elena as she considered the scope of what they had uncovered. What began as a personal humiliation, a groom abandoning his bride on the morning of their ceremony, now appeared to be part of a much larger, more dangerous scheme, threatening the stability of an entire pack. "We need proof," Elena said finally. "Suspicion alone will not be enough to convince Garrick or the elders of what is truly happening." "Agreed," Damon said, "which means we need to find Cade himself and convince him to speak honestly about what led to his disappearance." Locating Cade proved more difficult than either of them anticipated. He and Nora Blake had traveled far from Thornridge territory, deliberately avoiding any trail that might lead pursuers back to them. It took nearly 2 weeks of careful investigation, cross-referencing reports from traveling merchants and border patrols, before Finn finally located a small settlement near the coastal territories where the couple had been staying under assumed names. Damon insisted on traveling to speak with Cade personally, though he invited Elena to join him, recognizing that her presence might carry more weight in convincing Cade to speak honestly about what truly happened. Elena agreed, despite her father's initial reluctance to let her travel so far from Ashwood territory during such an uncertain time. The journey took 3 days, and Elena found herself growing increasingly comfortable in Damon's presence during the long hours of travel. their conversations drifting easily between serious discussions of pack politics and lighter moments of genuine curiosity about each other's lives. She learned about his childhood, his early years struggling to earn the respect of older, more experienced pack members after his father's sudden death. He learned about her quiet rebellions, small moments of independence she had carved out for herself, despite years of careful obedience. When they finally arrived at the coastal settlement, they found Cade in a modest cottage near the shoreline, looking noticeably thinner and more haggard than Elena remembered. Nora stood beside him protectively as they approached, clearly wary of the unexpected visitors. "Elena," Cade said, his voice carrying genuine surprise and something that looked uncomfortably close to guilt. "I did not expect you to come looking for me." "I am not here to demand you return," Elena said carefully. "I am here because I believe you were manipulated into leaving, and I need to understand exactly how it happened." Cade's expression shifted through several emotions before settling into something resigned. He glanced at Nora, who nodded encouragingly, and finally gestured for them to sit near the small fire outside the cottage. "Silas approached me nearly a month before the ceremony," Cade admitted quietly. "He knew about my feelings for Nora, feelings I had been trying desperately to suppress out of loyalty to my father's wishes. He told me he could help us disappear together, that he could arrange everything I needed to start a new life, far from Thornridge territory, but only if I left on the exact morning of the ceremony, without warning, without explanation." "Did he tell you why the timing mattered so much?" Damon asked. Cade shook his head. "He said it would embarrass my father publicly, which I assumed was simply an attempt to punish me for choosing love over duty. I did not realize until much later that the timing might have served a larger purpose." Elena listened carefully, feeling a complicated mixture of anger and sympathy toward the man who had once been her intended husband. Whatever mistakes Cade had made, it was becoming increasingly clear that he had been used as a tool in someone else's larger scheme, manipulated by promises of freedom, while unknowingly setting a dangerous plan into motion. "Will you testify to this before the Thornridge elders?" Damon asked directly. Cade hesitated, glancing again at Nora, fear evident in his expression. "If I return, my father may never forgive me for the humiliation I caused, regardless of Silas's involvement." "Your father deserves to know the truth," Elena said gently. "And if Silas succeeds in his plan, the consequences will extend far beyond your personal reputation. This affects the stability of your entire pack." Cade sat in silence for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the weight of the decision before him. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I will return, on the condition that Nora is protected from any retaliation, and that my father hears my explanation before any punishment is decided." Damon agreed to the terms, and as the sun began to set over the quiet coastal settlement, Elena felt a cautious sense of hope settle over the difficult journey ahead. They now had the proof they needed to expose Silas Vane's manipulation, though convincing Garrick Thornridge to believe it, and confronting a man skilled in political maneuvering, promised to be far more dangerous than anything they had faced so far. The journey back to Thornridge territory felt far more tense than the one that had brought them to the coastal settlement. Cade rode alongside Elena and Damon in uneasy silence, his earlier resignation now shadowed by visible anxiety about how his father would react to both his return and the truth about Silas Vane's involvement in his disappearance. Elena watched him carefully throughout the journey, noting the way his hands tightened around the reins whenever they discussed what awaited them, the way his eyes darted nervously toward the horizon, as though expecting trouble to emerge from the tree line at any moment. She could not entirely blame him for his fear. Confronting a powerful advisor with accusations of manipulation was a dangerous undertaking, regardless of how strong their evidence might be. "We should consider how we present this information carefully," Damon said as they made camp on the final night before reaching Thornridge territory. "If we accuse Silas too directly, without allowing Garrick time to process the situation, he may react defensively rather than rationally." "Garrick has always trusted Silas's counsel," Cade said quietly, staring into the small campfire. "They have worked together for over a decade. Convincing him that his most trusted advisor orchestrated this entire scheme will not be easy." Elena considered the problem carefully. "Perhaps we should not begin with accusations at all. Perhaps we should simply present the facts, Allow your father to draw his own conclusions based on evidence rather than our interpretation of it. Damon nodded approvingly. A wise approach. We have your testimony, Cade, along with evidence of the mercenary group responsible for the border attack and their connection to funds traced back to Silas's household. If we lay out the timeline clearly, the pattern should become difficult to ignore. The following morning, they arrived at the outskirts of Thornridge territory, where Garrick had been informed in advance of his son's return through a carefully worded message sent ahead by Damon's messenger. The Alpha waited for them in his private study rather than a public setting, a decision Elena appreciated, understanding that whatever unfolded next would be easier to navigate without an audience of anxious pack members. Garrick's expression when Cade entered the room was a complicated mixture of relief and lingering anger, the tension between father and son evident in the stiff way they regarded each other across the room. Elena and Damon remained near the doorway, allowing father and son a brief, difficult moment before the larger conversation began. "I owe you an explanation," Cade said finally, his voice steadier than Elena expected. "What I did was wrong, leaving the way I did, embarrassing you and our entire pack in front of witnesses from 3 territories. But I need you to understand that my decision was manipulated by someone you trust." Manipulated by whom? Cade glanced briefly at Elena and Damon before continuing. "Silas approached me weeks before the ceremony. He knew about my feelings for Nora, and he offered to help us start a new life together, but only if I left on the exact morning of the ceremony, without warning." Garrick's expression darkened considerably, though skepticism remained evident in his tightened jaw. Silas has served this pack faithfully for over a decade. Why would he orchestrate something so damaging to our reputation? Damon stepped forward, his voice calm and measured as he laid out the evidence they had gathered. "We believe Silas's goal was never simply to help your son pursue his own happiness, though that may have been a convenient justification he offered. We believe the true purpose was to sabotage the alliance between Thornridge and Ashwood, weakening your position within the pack, while positioning himself as a stronger, more decisive alternative leader." He continued methodically, explaining the connection between the mercenary group responsible for the border attack on Crossline territory and funds traced back to Silas's household, carefully avoiding accusatory language while presenting the timeline of events with clear, deliberate precision. Garrick listened in silence, his expression shifting gradually from skepticism to something closer to troubled consideration as the evidence accumulated. When Damon finished, the Alpha remained quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents and reports spread across his desk. "If this is true," Garrick said finally, his voice low, "it means I have trusted the wrong man for years, allowing him access to information and resources that he used against my own pack's interests." "We understand this is difficult to accept," Elena said gently. "But the pattern is too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Cade's sudden disappearance, the attack timed precisely when Damon's presence at the ceremony, created an opportunity for a new alliance, the funds connecting Silas to the mercenaries involved. Together, these details paint a troubling picture." Garrick rose slowly from his desk, moving toward the window that overlooked the Thornridge grounds, his expression heavy with the weight of betrayal. "Silas has been advocating for months that I step back from leadership responsibilities, citing my age and what he called my overly cautious approach to expanding our territory's influence. I dismissed his suggestions as simple ambition, never imagining he might be actively working to undermine my position through deception. "What will you do?" Cade asked quietly. Garrick turned back to face the room, something resolute settling into his expression despite the obvious pain of the situation. "I will confront him directly, though carefully. If he suspects we know the truth before we are prepared to act, he may attempt to flee or destroy further evidence of his involvement." Damon nodded in agreement. "A wise precaution. We should gather additional confirmation before any confrontation, ensuring Silas cannot simply deny everything and escape consequences." Over the following days, Garrick quietly initiated a discreet investigation within his own household, carefully avoiding any direct accusations, while gathering additional testimony from members of his staff who had witnessed suspicious activity connected to Silas's private dealings. Elena remained at Thornridge territory during this period, working alongside Damon and Cade to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy. They discovered that Silas had been quietly building alliances with several disgruntled Thornridge pack members for over a year, individuals who shared his belief that Garrick's leadership had grown weak and that the pack's future depended on more aggressive expansion rather than continued peace negotiations with neighboring territories. It became increasingly clear that the attack on Damon's outpost and Cade's manipulated departure were only the most recent moves in a much longer, more carefully constructed campaign to destabilize Thornridge leadership. "He has been patient," Damon observed one evening as they reviewed the gathered evidence together in Garrick's study. "Building support gradually, waiting for the right moment to create enough chaos that Garrick's removal would seem like a necessary solution rather than a hostile takeover." Elena felt a chill settle over her as the full scope of the danger became clear. If we confront him too soon, before we understand exactly how many pack members he has convinced to support him, we risk triggering open conflict within Thornridge territory itself. "Then we must move carefully," Garrick said, his voice firm despite the exhaustion evident in his expression. "We will gather every piece of evidence available, identify exactly who among my own advisors and guards remains loyal, and only then will we act." As the investigation deepened, Elena found herself growing increasingly aware of the genuine danger surrounding them all. What had begun as a personal humiliation on the morning of her own naming ceremony had unraveled into a conspiracy, threatening the very foundation of an entire pack's leadership, and she understood now that there could be no simple, easy resolution waiting at the end of this dangerous path. Nearly 2 weeks passed as Garrick's quiet investigation slowly uncovered the true extent of Silas Vane's influence within Thornridge territory. Elena remained throughout much of this period, finding herself drawn deeper into the pack's internal affairs than she had ever anticipated when she first agreed to hear Damon's proposal in that small chamber weeks earlier. She spent her days working alongside Damon and Cade, reviewing testimony gathered discreetly from loyal pack members, cross-referencing financial records, and slowly building a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy threatening to unravel Thornridge leadership. The work was tedious and often frustrating, but Elena found unexpected satisfaction in contributing meaningfully to something larger than her own personal circumstances. During the quieter moments between their investigative efforts, she and Damon continued growing closer, their conversations deepening beyond careful political strategy into something more personal and honest. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would review the day's findings together, their discussions often drifting into lighter topics once the serious work was completed. "You handle pressure remarkably well," Damon observed one evening as they sat together in the quiet garden behind the Thornridge estate, reviewing a stack of documents by lamplight. "Most people in your position would have retreated to safety rather than involving themselves in something this dangerous." Elena considered his words carefully before responding. "I spent most of my life being protected from difficult decisions, kept comfortable and sheltered while others determined my future for me. I find I would rather face danger honestly than continue living that way." Damon studied her for a long moment, something warm and genuine softening his usual careful composure. "I admire that about you, more than I expected to when I first walked into that ceremony hall." The conversation lingered in Elena's thoughts long after they parted for the evening, a quiet warmth settling into her chest that she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She reminded herself that the larger conspiracy still demanded their full attention, that indulging in personal feelings while so much remained unresolved would be careless. Yet she found it increasingly difficult to separate her growing feelings for Damon from the dangerous work they continued together. Their investigation eventually revealed that Silas had recruited nearly a dozen Thornridge pack members to his cause, promising them positions of greater influence once he successfully replaced Garrick as Alpha. Among these recruits was a young guard named Bram Foster, who had grown resentful after being repeatedly passed over for promotion in favor of more experienced warriors. Elena and Cade approached him carefully, appealing to his sense of loyalty toward the pack rather than his personal grievances, eventually convincing him to share detailed information about Silas's plans in exchange for leniency regarding his own involvement. "Silas intends to act soon," Bram admitted nervously during a private conversation in one of the estate's quieter corridors. "He believes the recent chaos surrounding the failed ceremony has created enough doubt about Garrick's leadership that pack members will support a change if presented with the right circumstances." What circumstances? Kate asked sharply. Bram hesitated, glancing nervously toward the door before continuing. He is planning to stage another crisis, something dramatic enough to convince the pack that Garrick can no longer adequately protect Thornridge territory. I do not know the exact details, only that it involves coordination with rogue elements, similar to those responsible for the attack on Crossline territory. Elena felt a fresh wave of urgency settle over her as she relayed this information to Damon and Garrick later that evening. If Silas is planning another attack, we cannot afford to wait much longer before confronting him directly. Garrick's expression hardened with determination, despite the clear pain of confronting betrayal from someone he had trusted for years. Then we must act quickly, before he has the opportunity to execute whatever plan he has devised. They spent the following 2 days carefully coordinating their response, identifying which guards and advisors remained genuinely loyal to Garrick's leadership, and quietly positioning them to prevent Silas from escaping or rallying additional support once his betrayal became public. Damon contributed a small contingent of trusted Crossline warriors to assist, ensuring Thornridge territory had adequate protection should Silas attempt any desperate final move. The confrontation finally occurred on a tense evening, when Garrick summoned Silas to his study, under the pretense of discussing routine pack business. Elena, Damon, and Cade remained hidden nearby, ready to intervene should the situation escalate beyond simple conversation. "You wish to speak with me, Alpha," Silas said as he entered the study, his expression carrying the same calm confidence Elena remembered from previous encounters with the advisor. "I did," Garrick said, his voice deceptively calm, despite the tension evident in his posture. "I wanted to discuss the recent attack on Crossline territory, and its curious connection to funds traced back to your household." Silas's expression flickered, almost imperceptibly, though he quickly recovered his composure. "I am not certain what you mean, Alpha. I have no knowledge of any connection between myself and that unfortunate incident." "Then perhaps you can explain why nearly a dozen of our own pack members have testified to your recruitment efforts," Garrick continued, his voice hardening with each word. "Or why my son admits you personally orchestrated his disappearance on the morning of his intended marriage ceremony." Silas's calm facade finally cracked, something colder and more calculating emerging beneath his carefully maintained composure. "You have grown weak, Garrick. Your caution has cost this pack opportunities for growth, opportunities I have watched slip away year after year, while you clung to outdated notions of peace, with territories that have never truly respected our strength." "So you admit it," Garrick said quietly, though the confirmation clearly wounded him despite his earlier suspicions. "I admit that this pack deserves better leadership than what you have provided," Silas said, his voice rising with barely contained anger. "I have spent years building the foundation for a stronger Thornridge, one unafraid to expand its influence through decisive action rather than endless negotiation." Elena stepped out from where she had been hidden, unable to remain silent any longer. "By manipulating a young man's heart against his own family, by hiring mercenaries to attack innocent territories and create false crises to justify your ambitions." Silas's eyes narrowed as he registered her presence, along with Damon and Cade emerging from the shadows behind her. "I should have known Alpha Cross would involve himself in matters that do not concern him." "Everything that threatens the stability of neighboring territories concerns me," Damon said, his voice carrying quiet authority, "especially when it involves attacks against my own people." Realizing he was now surrounded and thoroughly exposed, Silas's expression shifted rapidly between anger and calculation, clearly searching for any remaining path toward escape or advantage. "You cannot prove any of this holds together as more than circumstantial suspicion." "We have testimony from Cade himself," Garrick said firmly. "We have Bram Foster's confession regarding your recruitment efforts. We have financial records connecting you directly to the mercenaries responsible for attacking Crossline territory. The evidence is far beyond circumstantial." Silas's shoulders sagged slightly as the weight of his exposed betrayal finally settled over him, though a dangerous glint remained in his eyes, the look of a man unwilling to accept defeat without one final desperate move. Elena tensed, sensing the confrontation was far from over, and that whatever happened next would determine not only Silas's fate, but potentially the future stability of Thornridge territory itself. The tension in Garrick's study grew unbearable, as Silas Vane weighed his options, his eyes darting between the exits, and the 4 people now blocking any hope of escape. Elena watched him carefully, recognizing the desperate calculation behind his expression. The look of a man realizing his carefully constructed plans had finally collapsed beyond repair. "You think exposing me changes anything meaningful?" Silas said finally, his voice low and tight with barely controlled fury. "Even if you remove me from this position, the pack members I have gathered will not simply abandon their belief that Thornridge deserves stronger leadership." "Perhaps not immediately," Garrick admitted, his voice steady despite the obvious pain of confronting years of betrayal from someone he had once trusted deeply. "But they will understand, in time, that true strength does not come from manipulation and secret alliances built on deception." Silas's gaze shifted toward Damon, something calculating flickering behind his anger. "And what of you, Alpha Cross? Surely you understand ambition. Surely you recognize that sometimes difficult, unconventional choices are necessary to secure a stronger future for one's people." "I understand ambition," Damon replied evenly. "I do not understand betraying the trust of an entire pack for personal advancement, nor do I respect endangering innocent lives through hired violence, simply to manufacture a crisis." Silas's expression darkened further, and for a moment, Elena feared he might attempt something desperate, a final act of violence born from cornered fury, rather than rational calculation. She tensed instinctively, ready to move if necessary, though she trusted Damon and Garrick to handle the immediate confrontation. Instead, Silas's shoulders slowly slumped, the fight visibly draining from his posture as the reality of his situation settled over him fully. "What happens now?" he asked quietly, his earlier defiance replaced by something closer to resignation. Garrick considered the question carefully before responding. "You will be stripped of your position and your standing within this pack. Given the severity of your actions, particularly the attack on cross-line territory that risked innocent lives, exile is the most lenient consequence I am prepared to offer." "Exile," Silas repeated, something bitter twisting his expression. "After years of loyal service, this is how you repay me? Your loyalty ended the moment you began orchestrating attacks against neighboring territories and manipulating my own son for your personal ambitions," Garrick said firmly. "You are fortunate I am choosing mercy rather than harsher justice, given the danger your actions created." Silas said nothing further, his expression hardening into something cold and unreadable, as two loyal Thornridge guards entered the study to escort him from the estate. Elena watched him go, feeling a complicated mixture of relief and lingering unease, aware that while the immediate threat had been resolved, the damage caused by his manipulation would take considerable time to fully repair. In the days that followed, Garrick worked carefully to address the concerns of pack members who had been swayed by Silas's promises of stronger leadership, holding open discussions to explain the full scope of the deception and reaffirming his commitment to protecting Thornridge territory through steady, thoughtful governance rather than reckless expansion. Elena watched these efforts with quiet admiration, recognizing the genuine care Garrick brought to repairing the trust his pack had placed in him. Cade, too, worked to rebuild his relationship with his father and his pack, publicly acknowledging his own role in the unfolding events, while explaining honestly how he had been manipulated by Silas's false promises. Nora eventually joined him at Thornridge territory, and though their arrival was met with initial skepticism from some pack members, Cade's genuine remorse and willingness to take responsibility gradually earned him a measure of renewed respect. Elena found herself reflecting often during this period on how dramatically her circumstances had shifted since the disastrous morning of her intended naming ceremony. She had arrived at that ceremony expecting to become Luna of a pack led by a man who barely acknowledged her presence, only to find herself, weeks later, deeply involved in exposing a conspiracy that had threatened the stability of an entire territory. Throughout this period, her relationship with Damon continued deepening in ways she had not anticipated when she first agreed to hear his proposal. Their shared work uncovering Silas's betrayal had forged a genuine bond between them, built not on political convenience or hurried promises, but on mutual respect, earned through facing real danger together. One quiet evening, as the immediate crisis finally began settling into calmer resolution, Damon found Elena walking alone through the Thornridge Gardens, her expression thoughtful as she watched the last light of sunset fade behind the distant hills. "You seem lost in thought," he said, joining her along the quiet path. "I am thinking about everything that has happened since that morning at the ceremony, Elena admitted. It feels like an entirely different lifetime ago, though it has only been a matter of weeks. Damon studied her carefully, something gentle and sincere softening his usual composed expression. Has your perspective on my offer changed, given everything we have experienced together? Elena turned to face him fully, considering her answer honestly, rather than rushing toward a convenient response. I came into this situation wary of powerful men, making decisions about my future, without genuinely considering what I wanted. I still carry some of that caution, and I imagine I always will. That seems reasonable, Damon said quietly. But, Elena continued, I have also come to understand something important through these past weeks. You have never once tried to control my choices, or pressure me toward a decision I was not ready to make. You have treated me as someone capable of contributing meaningfully to difficult, dangerous work, rather than someone to be protected and managed from a distance. Damon remained silent, allowing her the space to continue without interruption, his expression carefully attentive. I do not yet know exactly what our future might look like, Elena said honestly, but I find myself wanting to discover that answer with you, rather than walking away simply because uncertainty frightens me. A quiet warmth spread across Damon's expression, something genuine and unguarded that Elena had rarely seen from him, even during their most honest conversations. I am glad to hear that, he said simply. Though I want you to know, regardless of whatever we decide moving forward, I will always respect your right to change your mind. Elena smiled, a genuine, unforced expression that felt unfamiliar after weeks of tension and careful calculation. I appreciate that more than you know. As they continued walking together through the quiet gardens, Elena felt a sense of peace settling over her that had been entirely absent since the chaotic morning of her intended ceremony. Whatever challenges still remained ahead, she understood now that she was facing them not as a pawn moved carelessly across someone else's political board, but as someone whose voice and choices genuinely mattered. Word of Silas Vane's exile spread quickly beyond Thornridge territory, reaching both Ashwood and Crossline lands within days. Elena's father received the news with visible relief, understanding immediately how close the region had come to descending into renewed conflict had the conspiracy remained undiscovered. He requested a formal meeting between the three territories to address the lingering tensions and formally restore stability following weeks of uncertainty. The meeting took place at neutral ground near the border shared by all three territories, a wide clearing traditionally used for important negotiations that affected the entire region. Elena stood beside her father as representatives from Ashwood, Thornridge, and Crossline gathered together, the mood considerably more solemn than the chaotic energy of the failed ceremony weeks earlier. Garrick spoke first, addressing the assembled crowd with a steadiness Elena had not seen from him since before the conspiracy unraveled his sense of security within his own pack. I stand before you today, acknowledging a painful truth, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. For years, I trusted an advisor who worked secretly against the stability of our territory, manipulating my own son and endangering innocent lives to further his personal ambitions. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, though the mood remained respectful rather than hostile, the weeks since Silas's exposure having already softened much of the initial shock and anger. I take full responsibility for failing to recognize this betrayal sooner, Garrick continued. But I also stand here grateful for those who worked tirelessly to uncover the truth and protect our people from further harm. He gestured toward Elena and Damon, who stood together near the front of the gathered crowd. Without their courage and determination, this conspiracy might have succeeded in destabilizing not only Thornridge territory, but the fragile peace our three packs have worked so hard to maintain. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks as attention shifted toward her, though this time the sensation carried none of the humiliation she had experienced during the failed ceremony weeks earlier. Instead, she felt something closer to quiet pride, recognizing that her contribution to uncovering the truth had genuinely mattered. Damon stepped forward to address the crowd as well, his voice carrying the calm authority Elena had come to admire deeply over the past weeks. What we uncovered reveals an important truth for all three of our territories. Peace is fragile, and it requires constant vigilance to protect against those who would exploit division for personal gain. I believe our three packs are stronger working together than allowing old suspicions to keep us divided. Victor Voss stepped forward next, his expression carrying genuine warmth as he addressed the crowd. I have watched my daughter navigate these past weeks, with a strength and wisdom I did not fully appreciate until recently. She has taught me that peace built through genuine partnership and mutual respect carries far more value than peace enforced through arranged obligations. He turned to face Elena directly, his voice softening. Whatever choice you make regarding your future, Elena, know that I support you fully, without condition or expectation. Elena felt tears gather unexpectedly at her father's words, the culmination of weeks of tension and uncertainty, finally finding release in this moment of genuine acknowledgement. She stepped forward to address the crowd herself, her voice steady, despite the emotion coursing through her. I stood in this position once before, she said, at a ceremony that ended in humiliation and abandonment, watched by hundreds of witnesses who assumed my worth depended entirely on whether a man chose to honor a promise he never truly wanted to keep. The crowd remained silent, listening intently as she continued. Since that day, I have learned that my value does not depend on any single ceremony, any single promise made by others on my behalf. It depends on the choices I make for myself, and the courage I find to pursue truth, even when it leads somewhere dangerous and uncertain. She turned to look at Damon, who watched her with quiet, unwavering attention. I have also learned that partnership, built on genuine respect, looks very different from obligation, built on political convenience. I am grateful to have discovered that difference, even through such difficult circumstances. The crowd remained hushed, sensing the significance of the moment unfolding before them. Elena took a steadying breath before continuing. Alpha Cross offered me a choice weeks ago, one I was not prepared to answer at the time. I believe I am prepared now. She turned fully to face Damon, her heart pounding, though her voice remained clear and certain. I choose to accept your offer, not because of any debt owed or obligation fulfilled, but because these past weeks have shown me exactly the kind of partner and leader you are. I would be honored to stand beside you as Luna of Crossline territory. A wave of emotion crossed Damon's face, genuine surprise mixed with profound relief and happiness that he made no effort to hide from the watching crowd. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, until he stood directly before her. Elena Voss, he said, his voice carrying clearly despite its quiet intensity. I promise you a partnership built on genuine respect, honesty, and equal voice in every decision that shapes our future together. I promise never to treat you as anything less than an equal partner in leading our people. The crowd erupted into applause and cheers, the mood shifting dramatically from the solemn tension of earlier discussions into genuine celebration. Elena felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift, though the warmth radiating from Damon's expression steadied her more than she expected. Garrick stepped forward once more, addressing the crowd with visible relief. Let this moment mark a new chapter for all three of our territories, one built on genuine partnership rather than forced obligation. Let the peace we forge today be stronger and more lasting than anything achieved through the arrangements of the past. As the celebration continued around them, Elena found a quiet moment alone, with Damon near the edge of the clearing, away from the immediate attention of the crowd. This is not quite how I imagined this conversation happening, she admitted, a small smile touching her lips. I find I rather prefer how it actually happened, Damon replied, his own smile genuine and unguarded. A choice made freely, after weeks of proving ourselves to each other through actual trial, rather than empty promises. Elena studied his face carefully, recognizing in this quiet moment just how far her circumstances had shifted since that chaotic morning weeks earlier. What began as humiliation and abandonment had transformed, through courage and genuine partnership, into something she had never expected to find, a future chosen entirely on her own terms. There is still much work ahead of us, she said, her mind already turning toward the practical challenges of formally uniting their territories and continuing to rebuild trust across all three packs. There is, Damon agreed, but I find myself looking forward to facing those challenges together, rather than navigating them alone. As the celebration continued around them, and the three territories began the delicate process of formally establishing renewed peace, Elena felt a quiet certainty settle over her heart. Whatever difficulties still lay ahead, she was no longer facing them as a pawn moved carelessly across someone else's political board, but as an equal partner freely choosing her own path forward. 3 months passed, before the formal naming ceremony finally took place, this time within Crossline territory, surrounded by careful preparations that reflected the genuine partnership Elena and Damon had built together, rather than the rushed political arrangement of her first, failed attempt. Elena spent those months dividing her time between Ashwood and Crossline territories, gradually learning the responsibilities that would soon become her own, while continuing to strengthen the bonds of trust between all three packs. The rebuilding process within Thornridge territory continued steadily under Garrick's careful leadership, with Cade taking on increasing responsibility as he worked to earn back the trust of his pack, following the events surrounding his disappearance. Nora had been formally welcomed into Thornridge territory, and though some skepticism remained among older pack members, the couple's genuine commitment to rebuilding their standing within the community gradually softened much of the earlier resentment. Elena visited often during this period, finding an unexpected friendship developing with Cade, despite the awkward circumstances of their shared history. "I never properly thanked you," Cade told her during one such visit, as they walked together through the Thornridge Gardens where so much of the recent conspiracy had first begun unraveling, "for helping expose Silas's manipulation, even after everything that happened between us." "You do not owe me thanks," Elena replied honestly. "I did what felt right, not simply for your sake, but for the stability of three territories that deserved better than being manipulated by someone's hidden ambitions." "Still," Cade said, "I am grateful, and genuinely happy for you and Damon. You deserve the kind of partnership built on actual choice, something I nearly cost you through my own carelessness." Elena appreciated his honesty, recognizing that Cade, too, had grown considerably through the difficult months following his disappearance. Whatever awkwardness remained between them gradually settled into a comfortable, if occasionally complicated, friendship built on shared experience, rather than lingering resentment. Meanwhile, her relationship with Damon continued deepening steadily, built on the foundation of trust they had established through facing genuine danger together. They spent long evenings discussing the practical challenges of formally uniting their territories, working through questions of shared resources, border management, and the delicate process of introducing Elena to the full responsibilities of leading Crossline territory alongside him. Mira, Damon's younger sister, became an unexpected source of support and friendship during this transition period. She sought Elena out shortly after the announcement of their engagement, her expression carrying genuine warmth despite the formal circumstances of their introduction. "I have waited years to properly thank you," Mira said, her voice carrying quiet emotion as she recalled the incident that had first connected their lives years earlier. "You saved my life that day near the river, and I never even knew your name until my brother finally tracked you down." "You do not need to thank me," Elena said gently. "I only did what felt necessary in that moment." "Regardless," Mira said, "I am grateful beyond words that circumstances eventually brought you into our family properly. My brother has never spoken about anyone the way he speaks about you." The two women quickly developed a genuine friendship, Mira eagerly sharing her extensive knowledge of pack law and territorial governance, as Elena worked to prepare herself fully for the responsibilities awaiting her as Luna. Elena found herself grateful for the connection, recognizing that entering an entirely new territory and leadership role would have felt considerably more isolating without Mira's genuine warmth and guidance. As the formal ceremony approached, Elena found herself reflecting often on the dramatic journey that had brought her to this point. She thought of the humiliation she had experienced standing alone at her first intended ceremony, the shock of watching Damon storm through those doors uninvited, the weeks of careful investigation that had exposed a conspiracy threatening the stability of an entire region. Each difficult experience had shaped her into someone considerably stronger and more certain of her own worth than the young woman who had once stood passively accepting whatever future others arranged for her. The morning of the formal ceremony arrived clear and bright, the gathered crowd considerably larger than the tense assembly that had witnessed her first failed attempt months earlier. Representatives from all three territories filled the Crossline ceremonial hall, their expressions carrying genuine celebration rather than the anxious uncertainty of that earlier, chaotic morning. Elena stood at the center of the ceremonial platform, dressed in deep blue robes that reflected Crossline's colors, her hands steady despite the significance of the moment unfolding before her. This time, she did not wait anxiously for someone else to determine the course of her future. This time, she stood present and certain, having chosen this path entirely through her own deliberate consideration. Damon approached the platform with the same quiet confidence she had first witnessed months earlier, though the intensity in his expression now carried genuine warmth, rather than the fierce determination of that initial confrontation. He stopped before her, taking her hands gently in his own, as the assembled elders began the formal naming ritual. "Elena Voss," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "Do you choose, freely and without obligation, to accept the role of Luna within Crossline territory, standing as my equal partner in leading our people?" "I do," Elena replied, her voice steady and certain, carrying none of the hesitation or fear that had shadowed her first attempted ceremony months earlier. The elders completed the ancient ritual, the ceremonial mark placed carefully, as the assembled crowd watched in respectful silence. When the ritual finally concluded, a wave of celebration erupted through the hall, considerably different from the shocked chaos that had followed her first disastrous ceremony. As the celebration continued around them, Elena found a quiet moment to step outside onto the balcony, overlooking Crossline territory, the vast landscape stretching before her under the warm afternoon sun. Damon joined her a few minutes later, standing quietly beside her, as they both took in the view together. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, genuine curiosity evident in his voice, despite the celebration continuing behind them. Elena considered the question carefully before answering, reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment. The humiliation and uncertainty transformed gradually into genuine partnership and hard-won trust. "I am," she said finally, turning to face him fully. "Not because everything unfolded easily, but because everything that happened taught me exactly what genuine partnership looks like, and helped me become someone capable of choosing it freely." Damon reached out, gently taking her hand in his own. "I am grateful every single day that I chose to walk through those doors months ago, rather than allowing you to stand alone in that hall." Elena smiled, genuine warmth spreading through her chest, as she looked out over the territory that would now become her home, standing beside a partner she had chosen entirely on her own terms. "And I am grateful you did," she said quietly. "Though I think, in many ways, I found my own strength that day too, long before I fully understood what it meant." Together they stood watching the sun begin its slow descent over Crossline territory, the celebration continuing behind them, marking not simply the beginning of a new leadership partnership, but the culmination of a journey that had transformed abandonment and humiliation into genuine strength, trust, and a future chosen freely by two people who had learned, through danger and difficulty, exactly what real partnership required. The peace between the three territories held strong in the years that followed, strengthened rather than weakened by the conspiracy that had once threatened to tear them apart. And Elena, once left standing alone at an altar in front of hundreds of witnesses, became known throughout the region, not as a woman abandoned by circumstance, but as a leader who had faced genuine danger with courage, uncovered a dangerous truth through determination, and ultimately chosen her own path forward with unwavering certainty.